Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Folks are still filtering in, but I wanted to take a moment to welcome folks that have chosen to be part of our conversation today. This is the WTIA DEI Center of Excellence Thought Leadership Series focusing on Black History Month, and we have a wonderful speaker to present, Dr. William A. Smith, as part of the University of Utah. And before we get started, I would just like to invite folks to use the chat function here to enter your name and affiliation in chat. Also, please feel free to share your Twitter or your LinkedIn handles so we may all be acquainted. And we have more people coming through, so we will get started shortly. I just wanted to quickly introduce myself. My name is Maylene Hamto, and I am the Executive Consultant for Programs and Strategy Enablement for WTIA, as well as a practice partner for Diversity Waymaker Consulting. As a DEI practitioner, it's truly my honor and privilege to be part of putting this event together and witnessing Black excellence in action through the presentation by Dr. William A. Smith, followed by his fireside chat with our WTIA Chief Diversity Officer, Yolanda Chase. So before we get started, we have a few words of grounding and acknowledgements to share. This program is brought to you by the DEI Center of Excellence. And the mission of the DEI Center of Excellence is to lead and support the creation of anti-racist multicultural organizations where equity is deeply rooted and sustained in our workplaces and the communities that we serve. Some of the key offerings that we provide are DEI assessments, thought leadership, such as this one that we are presenting today, curated learning opportunities, toolkits, and facilitation guides, as well as learning communities. WTIA has also partnered closely with Diversity Waymaker Consulting, which is led by experienced HR and leadership professionals with a combined 60 plus years of experience. The WTIA and Diversity Waymaker slate of solutions is focused on leadership skills that are essential to sustainable DEI outcomes. And we provide multiple engagement forms, including one-on-one and small group coaching, workshops, as well as an immersive digital experience that is being developed to be released this year. And as you choose to engage with WTIA and Diversity Waymaker in these offerings, you can expect to grow by developing your DEI leadership skills through self-assessment and discovery. We cover topics like anti-racism and leadership, self-reconciliation, addressing biases, connecting high-value competencies to DEI work, such as recruitment, retention, and continuous and sustained organizational improvement. What makes WTIA different from others in helping you do this is that we bring the insights and experience of decades of working with industry leaders in DEI, organizational management, and human resources. Our solutions are focused on companies of all sizes and all stages of development within the technology industry. I also wanted to note that this work will not be possible without the support of the founding sponsors for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Center of Excellence, Lyft, First Tech Credit Union, as well as Verizon. Thank you so much. The purpose of our DEI COE learning opportunities is to come together and educate ourselves and our teams fully on implicit bias, cultural awareness, and anti-racism in the workplace. We strive to share with each other best practices on how to effectively recruit, develop, and retain people of color, as well as share ideas on how to build lasting change in behavior among ourselves, our leaders, and the companies that we work in, with the goal of delivering more equitable outcomes in the workplace. Some key takeaways that we hope to bring forth to you through this presentation is understanding the research framework for racial battle fatigue, as well as learn about the evidence of racial battle fatigue in the workplace, and discuss the impacts of racism on employee morale, productivity, and engagement. So without further ado, I would like to share Dr. William A. Smith's bio before we bring him to our virtual stage. Dr. William A. Smith is the Chief Executive Administrator in the Huntsman Mental Health Institute at the University of Utah School of Medicine and the Department of Psychiatry. In this position, one of Dr. Smith's responsibilities is to lead the Institute in its effort around justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion at the institutional level, as well as leading national projects. He is a full professor and former department chair of education, culture, and society at the University of Utah. Additionally, he holds a joint appointment in the ethnic studies program as a full professor. Dr. Smith has served as the Associate Dean for Diversity, Access, and Equity in the College of Education, and also served as a special assistant to the president of the university as the NCAA Faculty Athletics Representative at the University of Utah. Dr. Smith's research focuses on his theoretical and scholarly contributions of racial battle fatigue, which is a concept that he coined in 2003. You are witnessing Black history here right now because Dr. Smith was the first scholar to coin that term. Racial battle fatigue refers to the cumulative emotional, psychological, physiological, and behavioral effects of racial micro-level aggressions and macro-level aggressions and their impacts on racialized targets of white supremacy. He summarizes this definition by saying that it is a systemic, race-related, repetitive stress injury. Dr. Smith is an internationally known scholar who is often sought out for keynote presentations and interviews. In the past 2 years alone, he has provided almost 100 keynote lectures, presentations, and interviews from South Africa to Australia to Fortune 500 companies in the US. Among his most influential presentations have been to the Utah Supreme Court Justices, the Chicago Center for Psychoanalysis and Psychotherapy, and some of the US leading colleges of medicine, including Cornell Weill Medical, University of Utah, and the University of California, Riverside. In 2021, Dr. Smith was awarded one of the University of Utah's highest honors with the Distinguished Professor Award for Scholarly Research and the Black Faculty and Staff's highest award, the James McCune Smith Award of Veneration. In October 2022, he was a recipient of the Derek Bell Legacy Award from the Critical Race Studies Education Association. Also, in 2021, Living Color Utah honored Dr. Smith with its award in education for people who have made it their mission to impact the areas of diversity. Dr. Smith received his undergraduate and master's degrees from Eastern Illinois University, BA in psychology and MS in counseling psychology. His Ph.D. is from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in educational policy studies and sociology/social psychology for higher education. Welcome, Dr. Smith.
Let me not waste a lot of time. Thank you for that introduction. And see, it's not advancing. There we go. All right. It's really important. And I want to give a tremendous thank you for inviting me here to speak for your Black History Month presentation. I wish I was coming today to share about great inventions and things that African Americans have done to move this country forward in positive and progressive ways. But the topic is still a very important topic. It's a topic that really hits home to a lot of African Americans, a lot of Black people in the United States. Thus, it is highly important for all people just to get a glimpse of what the lives are like for many Black people and what is racial battle fatigue and how it manifests itself in Black people across the United States. So thank you for this invitation. Before I go too far, I want to give you a little bit more of the intimate background of who I am. Well, my mother was a Chicago public school teacher, and she retired after 30 plus years in the Chicago school system. And I can say that she retired with her sanity. You know, not a lot of big city public school teachers can say that. She's still kicking and going out and being very active, but she was the foundation of who I am today. We had in our home a library of books, all about African Americans and African American contributions. So she didn't force me to read, but she made those bookshelves so enticing that I just had to pick off books from the shelf to read about the contributions of African Americans and Africans in this world. My father's name is William Smith as well, and he was one of Dr. Martin Luther King's bodyguards. Dr. King appointed him as chief of security over Operation Breadbasket, which was led by Reverend Jesse Jackson. We know Operation Breadbasket today as Operation Push. So coming from Chicago and from that kind of background, it was really important for us to understand what was our position in that society and how Black people were treated. But my mother taught me that racism was wrong. And she said, you have to prepare yourself to change the world. And so that's the real impetus of my research, is to try to make a difference by the guided hands of my mother, the motivation that my father gave for the work that he was doing, and for all of my relatives who basically poured into me. But let's talk about the goals for this presentation. One of the main goals that I'd like you to have is to obtain an understanding of systemic racism and how it operates to cause racial battle fatigue. Then I want us to understand the cycles of racial battle fatigue. I will try my best to provide strategies for breaking these cycles. Based on the time, I might have to speed up through that. But I want to then move into the role of racial healing and breaking the cycles, and then the ongoing work, the importance of working towards racial healing and equity, and what I see this organization is doing based upon its mission. Now let's get back to this quote. Racial battle fatigue is a systemic, racism-related, repetitive stress injury. Now, there's several slides in this presentation that I can really just spend the whole time just using to talk about, and this is one of them. One of the things I should say is that my mother raised us in a household that liked to play with puzzles, putting big puzzles together, 5,000 piece puzzles, 3,000 piece puzzles, and we would always do it around the holidays. And I was fortunate to marry a woman who had that same interest. So especially around Kwanzaa, all of our children were used to putting these big puzzles together. One of the things that you get from playing with puzzles is you have the advantage of seeing what the picture looks like as you put the pieces of the puzzle together. So you have kind of a guide. The unfortunate thing about our society is we're not given that picture oftentimes. We're given a lot of pieces and we don't know what to do with those pieces. So this presentation will be pieces to a sociological puzzle that I hope that you can put together as I start to give you information and you become more aware of what racial battle fatigue is and how it operates in the lives of Black people. Now, for Black History Month, obviously I'm talking about Black people, but this also impacts other racially minoritized people in the United States, and I should say across the world. Now, before I go any further, my Dean of Research and also our publicity person for the college and the university always get on me because I do not promote Twitter enough. So for those of you who, tweet or whatever it's called, tweet, please, if I say something that you find profound, please tweet it out so people know that you're here and listening to this presentation. So let's move forward now. We've already said that racial battle fatigue, in a clinical definition, is a systemic racism-related repetitive stress injury. Now, this is a lot of words on the screen, so let's just highlight the most important things. Racial battle fatigue is a psychological, emotional, physiological overload. This is a race-related stress appraisal that's taxing or exceeding our available resources. Thus, it is endangering to our well-being. The summation of this is we're operating in a disturbed person, environmental, racist relationship. Let me say that again. We're operating in a disturbed person, environmental, racist relationship. And that systemic process is the thing that takes a toll across our lifespan. And it helps us to understand why, for instance, that irrespective of education and income, Black people still are dying at a shorter lifespan than their other racial peers, particularly African-American men. So education and income, high income, are not protective factors for Black men. And we'll get more to this as we move on in this presentation. Now, this is the other slide. I could spend the rest of the presentation here just going through everything on this slide. And this is just an example of what racial battle fatigue is. Psychologically, it could be apathy, irritability, shock that something has happened to you in your life, in the workplace. Somebody's approached you in a very racist way and may not even be aware of how they approached you. It might be the anger that's in response to those micro and macro level aggressions. The disappointment because you had given your trust in a system, in a workplace, in a person, and they've disappointed you because they've leaned towards those stereotypes about what it means to be a Black person. Worrying, disbelief, hopelessness, helplessness, fear, or threat vigilance, hypervigilance. That's just the psychological aspect of racial battle fatigue. And you don't have to have all of them. You can have just one. And that's a pressing feeling across your life. The others are emotional and behavioral. Stereotype threat, John Henryism. You can either lose your connection to spirituality or increase it because of what has happened in your life. You might often feel like you're an imposter, that you will be found out because the system holds these stereotypes about you. And if you start to believe that you might fit that stereotype, then you don't believe that the success that you've had in life is relative and related to what you deserve. And that's feeling like an imposter. Or you might know that you are the best person for a position, but you might feel like you're being set up. You might have an increased appetite or you lose appetite, increase weight, lose weight, become impatient, quickness to argue. Some people will turn to alcohol and drugs or smoking. They might withdraw from people, close friends, relatives, or neglect some of their responsibility. And I know I'm stepping on some toes now. You're feeling somebody who's listening to this presentation has had one or more, many of these symptoms. Some of the physiological ones, headaches, grinding teeth, clenched jaws. I'm working with a group of dentists right now on a research project where we're looking at African Americans and this clenched jaw syndrome, where they will start to crack their teeth, particularly their molars, because of the stress that they take to bed with them. And they're clenched up at night. Chest pains, pounding heart problems, high blood pressure, muscle aches, indigestion, perspiration, hives, rashes, sleep disturbances, and insomnia. And this is really important here. Think about it. The stressful life events that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, say in the workplace, from going from home to work, getting ready to go to work, and you know that there's a racist experience that you tend to face every day. Now you're coming home and you're taking that stress load with you to bed and you can't relax. For many of us, we'll wake up in the morning feeling like we never have gone to sleep, that we're not fully rested. So sometime around 11 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we're feeling tired. Many of you will turn to coffee and get another 3 cups down your system. But all that does is mask the problem of what you're dealing with. This can cause fatigue, type 2 diabetes, and frequent illness. And these are, again, just some of the very many symptoms that people are dealing with when they deal with race-related stress. So let's move on. This first section is the importance of addressing racial battle fatigue and achieving racial equity. Now, increased productivity and well-being is one of the major outcomes for addressing this, for having this type of presentation. But what does that mean? Increased productivity and overall well-being is a positive. But what happens when the people in that environment don't feel like they're wanted, they're desired, they're respected, that there's a sense of belonging created for them, that they feel like they are excluded? Let's look at this. This is a study on approximately 60,000 Black women. Now, those Black women in this study, those who indicated that they felt like they were dealing with institutionalized racism and daily racism, were in both groups were about 3 times more likely to suffer from lower subjective cognitive functioning. Now, what does that mean? That means memory loss, Alzheimer, dementia. So those symptoms that's connected to the racism that these Black women have faced are being misdiagnosed because people are not drawing the correlation that these Black women are suffering based on racism, daily racism, and institutionalized racism that puts them at risk for lower subjective cognitive functioning. So I'm hoping that you're starting to put more pieces to the puzzle on your table, on your mental table. As we go along, we're going to fill in those holes. So this causes the problem for many of the diversity efforts if we do not make it systemic and institutional. Why? Another is improved community and organizational functioning, where people will feel safe and valued. You'll get increased cooperation and collaboration. But as that coin spins, typically what it says is on one side or the opposite side of the coin of Black trauma is white anxiety. Let me say that again. Typically, on the opposite side of the coin of Black trauma is white anxiety, white fear, uncomfort, discomfort, where they believe, many, not all, but many will believe if I say something or do something, it might come off as racist. And then I have to deal with that. So I'd rather not have a Black person around. The hiring committee will look at all the applications and they'll see who are the best. They'll bring in the final 3. And the best one is a Black woman or a Black man. But somehow, over and over and over again, the white candidate is hired over the Black. And I get so many people who contact me talking about how that happens in promotion as well. And sometimes this is a sign of fear in the room of having too many Black people in that presence. So it becomes the tipping point where there's only a certain percentage, small percentage, that's allowed access. Well, let's talk about other things that this anxiety causes. In this study for Black men, being tall increases threat stereotyping and police stops. Now, I know you can't tell from your screen, but I'm 6'3", and it's almost all of my life I've been seen as a threat, no matter the circumstances. No matter if I'm wearing a suit and tie, people start to fear me or get uncomfortable. And I've even been told, given apologies later for that feeling. But let's look at one of the quotes from this study. And this comes from Charles Coleman Jr., 6'4" Black attorney, quoting his mother. When you deal with the police, you must be careful. You are big and they will automatically see you as a threat. Now think about it. Here's another piece to this puzzle. How many of us have had the talk from our parents about how to act with the police if you get stopped by the police? Put both of your hands on the steering wheel. Be very respectful. Don't make any sudden moves. Do not get into arguments, right? The stress, and the threat of just driving out of your driveway with the potential that you might get stopped, or just driving, going about your business and you hear a siren and all of a sudden your heart starts racing, right? If you've ever been in that circumstance, that situation, you know what I'm talking about. So let's look at some New York City data. This is the rate of police stops versus Black men. So if I were to ask white women in New York City, is there a policing problem with stop and frisk? She would more than likely say no if she was just going based upon her own experience, because you could see it's very negligible that white women do not get stopped nor frisked by the police. But if she has a Black friend, a Black partner, Black men, she knows something different. And as you can see, in comparison to all other groups, there's a significant difference between a Black man driving his car in New York City and every other group, even the male peer groups. Some of the things that comes out of this study: in 2010, near the peak of the city's use of stop and frisk, Black residents in New York City were 8 times more likely to be stopped by the police than white residents, and 11 times more likely to be frisked. 23% of the stops are Black and Latino residents, but in only 16% of stops for white residents. Put that piece again in the puzzle. What might be the experience of Black men in New York City and very similar cities? It happened to me here in my first year in Salt Lake City. And I've been here 23 and a half years. And it happened to me twice. I'm gonna show you a video, short video. Same thing happened to me when I was a doctoral student at the University of Illinois. Just a 2-minute video, but what I want you to do is pay close attention to the police officers in this police stop. There's a police officer who has on, I think, a red or orange shirt. It'll be very clear in your video. Watch his reaction to this Black man, but then listen later in the call for the person who's talking to the police officer.
Church. 300 as at St. Mark's Church. Hold the air.
All right. I got my. On the ground! On the ground! Get on the ground! Get on the ground! Turn around! Stop resisting! Stop resisting! Sir, you're on video. As FYI. All right. Fine. I got cuffs. Yes, this is my vehicle, sir. I was trying to fix something on the roof. Okay. I have evidence to that end.
Well, when we tell you to get down, you got to get down.
Yes,
man.
sir. I understand.
Okay.
Now, why am I being put in handcuffs?
We got to verify the car is not stolen, man.
This is E4. I'm a Ph.D. student at Northwestern University in the Department of Materials Science and Engineering. I purchased this vehicle January 23rd, 2015 from Libertyville Chevrolet. I have all the evidence.
Ask me who it registers to.
Myself.
It registers. 73.
370.
Can you tell us who the plate registers to?
I don't know why I'm doing that. I mean, it doesn't matter. I gave you an order.
Network Detective Lawrence Crosby, 507 William Farmer.
You did. No, I did not. There is something called the Fifth Amendment. No.
Oh, God. That doesn't apply.
Yes, it does.
No, it doesn't.
Reasonable search and seizure. Why?
Hey, what's up?
Hi, I called.
506.
Okay.
It looked like he had a bar in his hand and was trying to jimmy it open.
Okay.
I feel really like I didn't mean to racial profile, just like.
Oh yeah, no.
Like that, and I don't want to like.
All right, man, just calm down.
I know.
Okay.
I just.
All right. He got a different issue going on right now. Let me see. Dan, want to get your information?
Yeah. No. Yeah. But
Okay.
I can give it to you.
Okay. Come this way.
Yeah.
I think it's fine.
Okay. I will have to get their information.
Now, that was Lawrence Crosby, now Dr. Lawrence Crosby, just being a student. In fact, what he was doing at the time was fixing the rubber seal between his door and the window. If you were able to see my car right now, it has the same problem where that little rubber seal has come off and is kind of flapping. Dr. Crosby was just trying to fix it. And this woman assumed that he was trying to break into the car. And this is what happened. But fortunately for Dr. Crosby, Evanston settled for $1.25 million. But there are so many Black people in this country who go through similar things and we don't know anything about it. So how can we build trust and foster authentic relationships? We must connect, better connect, and work together, sharing information, sharing stories, understanding the lives in which people live. And that is how trust can start to form and more authentic relationships can be developed. Now, we're still putting pieces of the puzzle together, and I'm not finished yet. And I, by my clock, have about 13 minutes, so I'm going to cut across the field, as those old Baptist pastors used to say, and try to bring us home. Let's look at this. Do you think the local police treat minorities more harshly, less harshly, or just as they do anyone else? As you can see here, 32% of African Americans say the same, but 54% say more harshly. Now, that is significantly different experience or realization of the world than their peer groups. How about giving that talk to your child? What do other people do? As you can see here, for African Americans, 74% feel they have to give the talk to the children, to their children, about being careful when dealing with the police, because you might not come home. This could be another situation like George Floyd. So parents are always worried, and their children are never too old to be concerned about where you're going. When you're in the car to take a trip, all right, be careful. Call me when you get to certain locations, right? You're always concerned. My daughter, who's college graduate, working on her master's degree in epidemiology and biostatistics at Berkeley, when she goes 30 miles outside of Berkeley, California, she has to let us know that it's a trip, that she's going to be all right, and where she's going, because we're concerned about her, like any parent would be. But for African Americans, we still have this added stress of driving while Black. Now let's move forward a little more quickly, because we want to understand these cycles and how racism creates and perpetuates racial battle fatigue. It's because of these constant exposures to discrimination. So racial battle fatigue is heightened because of the constant racial microaggressions that we experience, the racial profiling, the race lighting. And what this does is it tends to lead us to exhaustion, and for many of us to feel hopeless, or to have this threat vigilance, which means that we're on guard all the time. We're ready for the fight. So when you're always on guard, that's stressful. You never feel like you're in a restful state. Racial battle fatigue goes up. Now let's look at the data around this. Well, we're going to focus on police here, but those persistent and aggressive interactions with the police, what we find is Black men who report a high number of lifetime police stops have 3 times greater odds of current racial battle fatigue symptoms. And this was a study done in Chicago, my hometown. Black women report 2 times greater odds of current racial battle fatigue symptoms. And it doesn't just stop there, because there's this thing that we have to deal with that puts us in community with each other. When we see that we're socially devalued and marginalized, what tends to happen is we have feelings of anger, frustration, and then we feel isolated. because what we're trying to do is to protect ourselves. No one wants to live with pain and hurt. So when you feel it, when you see it, when you sense it, the natural response is protection, especially as you're being subsequently marginalized. Let's look at this study. And this talks about that spillover effect, right? Police killings. When a Black person who was unarmed and killed by the police, Black people in the state in which it occurred have up to 3 months of poor mental health days. I'm gonna say that again. Black people who see or witness the killing of an unarmed Black person by the police have up to 3 months of poor mental health days. Now, in this study, one of the things that was very interesting was the police killings amounted to about 55 million excess poor mental health days per year among Black adults. Now compare that to the 75 million poor mental health days of all US adults suffering from diabetes, just to put it in proportion with each other. And with this next study, it says it doesn't have to just occur in the state where the killings were. And in the previous study, one of the interesting things was Black people did not have poor mental health days for armed Black people. So Black people who had a weapon and got shot did not have poor mental health days. Whites had no response at all, whether the person was armed or unarmed. In this study, it says the impact, and if it's a highly racialized and publicized killing, impacts all Black people across the country. Think of George Floyd. Now, very quickly, because I know my time is short. This is a national study on Black women and racial battle fatigue that I performed. And I'm gonna read you just a couple quick quotes from this study. And this one comes from Alana. I face more racism as a Black woman as I've gotten further up than I did down below, because I think people are happy for me just to have a bachelor's degree. People are like, well, can't you just be a nurse practitioner? Wouldn't that just be good enough? Why? And I'm like, because I'm an effing surgeon. I mean, it's effing stupid. It's how they view you, right? How about brown girl? It's unbelievable how hard you have to work as a Black woman to be seen as anything close to being credible. I have 20 years of experience, yet my opinion is not given credibility. They would like to co-opt my idea and make it their own. It's draining. And McKinsey, the job was advertised for a full professor. I was hired, but they wanted to redo the contract. Instead of a full professor, it would be an associate professor. I had to fight. So it's just kind of like all the fighting to prove yourself that we are more qualified for a job. And lastly, Simone. A lot of times, specifically white women, will just assume that they are your boss. I've gone into situations where that has happened. It sounds childish, but I'm like, you're not my boss. And so this is what we're up against when we're dealing with trying to solve the problem of understanding racism, systemic racism, and mitigating racial battle fatigue. Now, I want to move quickly with these examples. Some of the things that we can do to reduce it is to have, one thing is we have physical and mental health issues from all of this. So that's how, as I explained earlier, high blood pressure, anxiety, depression can cause these stresses. We see constantly that African Americans have higher blood pressure than others, diabetes, and strokes across their lifespan. In other ways, understanding this cycle is difficulty in forming and maintaining relationships because of some of the examples that I gave before. You start to mistrust, you start to isolate, and then you have a lack of energy for social isolate or for interactions, social interactions. Why? Let's think about some of the other things that's happened in this country. We all probably have heard through school or learned through school about the 40-year study of the Tuskegee syphilis experiment of untreated syphilis in Negro men. But it's not just that. We've seen studies being done on Black women and hysterectomies without the benefit of anesthetics and painkillers. And here's some of the other studies. So you ask yourself the question, why are Black people reluctant to get the shot? I'm not going to spend time here, but I want to show you when COVID first came out, COVID-19, why almost 50% of Black people were reluctant. Maybe it might be because of those other studies and situations that have occurred. Strategies for breaking, we have to think about mindfulness and meditation to reduce stress and tension and to promote inner peace. We have to exercise and have physical activity that also reduces stress and tension and improves your mood and it promotes your overall well-being. We have to think about support groups, and you know I'm a high supporter of therapy. We have to have people who had similar experience who can affirm our reality and not question what we've gone through. I call those battle buddies. And they share these experiences, but they want to promote health. We also have to consider racial healing circles. And these are multi-ethnic, multiracial, but you have to do your work first. You can't go into these circles and then try to put yourself as the center. You have to understand the lived experience of other people and prepare yourself to be open and engaging. And the other is, this works very well in organizations and in the workplace, cultural competency training. But the key thing is you have to have people who desire it, who really want to make a difference, not people who are checking off a box or trying to get a promotion for the hours that they spend going to this training or that training. You have to have a full commitment. Then there's the community-based interventions like advocacy and policy change, pushing for things that you know where the root of racism is located. That's detrimental to certain groups, right? And I'll go through this rather quickly. We need to create protected spaces for healing. I don't really like the safe spaces, and I see Yolanda's there, so my time is very short. We have to acknowledge and validate the impact of racism and build trust and fostering authentic relationships. And I think this is consistent with the mission of WTIA. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Smith. I love this, and what a riveting and insightful presentation you have just blessed us with. We are honored and touched by your research, and we want to give you your flowers for all of the work that you've done in this area. I want to dive right in because so much that you've provided for us today has just, I know, touched me. And I'm pointing at the screen and going, that's me. I have that clenched jaw. Oh my gosh. Right. And truthfully, I think many of us have experienced those things and know that it is attributed to racial battle fatigue. And so for you, doing your research on trauma among these Black students, Black faculty, the Black employees, you dove pretty deep, clearly, in the research into these experiences of pain and emotional and mental abuse, including violence. And I'm sure you yourself have experienced some of that as well. We know by the reality of, kind of the vicarious secondary trauma that we talk so much about, which occurs when one gets exposed to people who have experienced traumatizing life events. While you were doing this research, how did you keep your head up and take care of your own well-being in this regard?
Well, thank you for that question. And it's an excellent question. One of the things I think is very, very important for us is to try to make home a place that is comforting, healing, relaxing, energizing, and loving. So I'm fortunate I have a strong Black woman. And I don't say that in a stereotypical way, because the strong Black woman is leading to a lot of deaths, premature deaths of Black women. But I'm talking about intellectually brilliant. She's a professor as well, a developmental psychologist. We have good children. And when you walk through our home, you know you're in a Black family's house. You see Black art, Black. Let me give it to you this way. There's a poet named Hakeem Mahabuti. He and his wife own Third World Press, one of the oldest Black publishing companies in the world. I call it the Haki test. He said, I can see the mental health of a Black family within 5 minutes when I walk into their home based upon my senses, my smell, taste, hearing, seeing. And he says, I look at the art on the wall. I look at what books are on the bookshelf, if there are any books at all. I can smell what's cooking in the kitchen, right? I can hear the music that's playing. So we're clearly centered in our culture, and we use our culture as strength because we come from a racial socialization of other Black people, Big Mama, Papa, our great-grandparents, who poured into us, and they've given us these kind of coping strategies. And so that's what our space is like. So.
Absolutely. And, I in listening to you talk about, kind of self-care and really being able to ensure that you take care of your own body, mind, and spirit, and you do that through your family and everything else. And I heard someone, actually it was a minister, Ben Sanders, had said about a week ago during a sermon that I was listening to, and he said that we must, as Black people, embrace the gift of our burden. And it was so powerful for me in this radical change that we are trying to not only gather up and help people to understand, but also push forth into the world. Every day, we have to embrace the gift of our burden.
Yes.
In doing so, our bodies, our brown bodies, our experiences, our lineage. And we actually have to use that as fuel to move forward, and then also surrounding ourselves with ways to calm and be peaceful. I love that.
Yeah.
So as many of us are still mourning the violent killings of Tyree Nichols, and almost 3 years after the radical reckoning brought on by the murder of George Floyd, it seems that we are fighting the same battle against racist institutions,
Mhm.
and the ongoing trauma experienced by Black folk is quite severe. And we know, and I saw someone in the chat say, when does it end, right? What advice do you give, and do you have on behalf of our beloved Black community to protect our hearts while staying committed to the struggle? Like we said before, embracing the burden of this radical change.
And I believe there is something to embracing the burden, but there's also something to Sankofa. And Sankofa, the Sankofa bird is a bird from Ghana that we use, especially in Kwanzaa, but any ceremony. It's a bird that moves forward looking backwards, right? And what it symbolizes is that you have to draw from the strength, the beauty, the intelligence, the creativity of your ancestors as you try to move forward. And so, yes, on one side there might be burden, but on the other side of this is healing from those who have come before us. And so when we do that, we realize that we are only going through what others have been through. And so that means that there is a playbook. And so we have to recognize that playbook and look for, here's another problem that we have. I hold higher education responsibility for this, professors. We'll report on the circumstances so much. And we will focus on that without having a strategy for getting through it and past this will never happen again, right? So we'll analyze and overanalyze a situation like the civil rights movement, right? And Kwame Ture told me, who was formerly known as Stokely Carmichael, he said, we had a plan for the movement, for the march, but not for the day after. We have to start planning for the day after, the strategies. And I'm going to use from that national study on Black women. I asked them, when's the last time you felt human? And many of them, if you could see their faces, they dropped back and they thought. And I said, that's too long. And they said, well, when I feel most human, it's when I feel most safe. And that safety is at home, with family or friends. So those friendship circles, those family circles, those close networks that we have are life fulfilling. And so we should not take those things for granted and take every opportunity that we can to spend time with people. When somebody comes up on your mind, reach out to them, talk to them, because that's a connection that we need for better health.
And it can be quite isolating, right?
Yeah.
I think even in my own world, I've experienced that, that fatigue so much. It's like, I don't want to go outside. I don't want to socialize. I just want to, kind of be in the quietude of my solitude, right? And it can be excruciatingly isolating. I want to remind those who are tuning in and listening and who might have questions to please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A area, not in the chat, but in the Q&A area, and we will definitely get to those questions as well. I'm sorry, Dr. Smith, did I interrupt you?
No, go ahead.
Great. So in the context of racial battle fatigue, what should non-Black allies do? I mean, let's talk a little bit about that. In order to advance racial justice and equity, what should our non-Black allies be doing?
Well, one of the things that they must do is to prepare for an understanding that their reality might not be everyone's reality, right? So as I showed in that chart where white women in New York City were rarely ever stopped by the police and frisked, right? So they might think that the policing is fine. based upon their lived experience.
Mhm.
But when you have data that shows that that is not the lived experience of everyone else, be open to hearing an alternative viewpoint, especially if you know that you saw with your on video, the George Floyd and others, those situations, those you can't explain that away, right? So push yourself past that pain that this isn't the Kansas that you know.
Right.
Wake up, Dorothy, right? And so once you do that, then you can start to be more open to those lived experiences of other people, and you can be a change agent, because we're stronger together than we ever can be when they try to tear us apart.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. We are stronger together for sure. And that kind of leads me to my next question around HR leaders and responsibility collectively, right? For establishing and enforcing policies on anti-discrimination, harassment in the workplace. Let's just pivot to the workplace for a moment, if we will. Sometimes practice does not always mirror the best intention in the name of fairness, right? When we think about the dynamics inside an organization. How do you think HR leaders should integrate a lens about racial trauma into their practices in the workplace?
Well, I think this is an actually great example of that in practice, right?
Right.
You have to be brave enough, and I'm assuming, and it's not always a good thing to assume. We know what assume, that metaphor in there means, but I'm assuming that your leadership from the very high up approves this, which means that's a step in the right direction, right? For other people, and the more than 50 plus people, and I think it was higher than that at one point, who tuned in here, and then all the hundreds of people who will watch this later, right? That they need something. They have to hear an alternative reality that is backed up with science and data.
Right.
And this is why it's beneficial, actually, to support a racist system. You lose on one end, but you gain on another. But to keep people ignorant perpetuates that system. So when you see what happened in Florida, we don't want people reading anything about Black people and seeing these struggles and successes, right? We want that off the books. And we want an alternative reality, a different reality, where our kids are not exposed to that. Because what happens when you get that well-meaning, sensitive, empathic white child who says, I don't like this system and we have to change it, right? I don't like how people are treated. They're not treated like I'm being treated, right? That is a step in a movement. And that's a movement to be concerned about, but it's a movement for healing and a better society. But it'll make all of us better, all of us wiser, all of us wealthier, right?
Right.
That's the fear.
That is the fear. And thinking through the lens of that perspective, I think is important in teaching it not only to our children coming up, but also to those leaders who inside organizations who are creating policies and practices that really are derived from one's experience as opposed to the consideration of those marginalized experiences. And we talk a lot about that in our Foundations for Diversity Waymaker as well, and even within our practice at WTIA, so much about leaders being able to embody and master and understand these perspectives in order to, effectively apply them and have sustainability in organizations when we talk about belonging. It's so important. I'm going to pivot just for a second and answer. We have a couple of questions inside the Q&A, and I want to make sure we get to them. The first question is, it says, I've noticed racial battle fatigue in my loved ones. The most obvious symptom that I often see is John Henryism. But how can this be combated when it is often necessary due to inherent systemic racism requiring overachievement for success, or in some cases, even basic respect? Right? Oh, this is amazing. The need to prove yourself in everyday situations does wear physically and mentally, but how can it be escaped?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Well, one of the things that has to be remembered in the John Henry scenario is that he died. He won, but he died.
He died.
So we have to understand that hypertension, high blood pressure, stroke, diabetes, all these other things come out of stress and stressful environments. And so we might have to say, while there is something that's good or that I like about this particular environment, it is so toxic to my being that I just can't stay here. So that means that you have to find a strategy and a pivot to something else that's much healthier for you, right? And the unfortunate thing is, we've been taught and socialized that you put your head down and you keep pushing forward, you push forward,
Yes.
push forward. And but what good does it do if you lose your life? If I was a person who really knew the Bible and all that other stuff, the preacher would say it was a sermon in there. But
Right.
I'm not. They would say it's a sermon in there, but I'm gonna leave that alone. That's
Right, exactly.
that's not my area.
Right.
But the thing is, what does a person gain if they lose their soul, their life, and the loved ones around them?
That is extremely powerful. This next attendee asks, and thanks you for your lecture, Dr. Smith. We have been talking about this topic for decades. How much risk should a DEI practitioner take working in institutions where it's obvious DEI is just a check mark, especially considering all the unintentional consequences to have an anti-racism initiative? Why do it if it's not going to move the needle because the top decision makers are racist? I love this question because I often say, yes, you are going to get into environments where you simply have to go around them, or you may have to make a decision not to be a part of that particular construct. But I would love to hear what you have to say about that, Dr. Smith.
I actually would love to hear what you have to say. I think you're the expert in that, and you obviously found a place where you can get your job done, because I'm here.
Right.
There's a lot of places that wouldn't, despite all my acclaim, wouldn't ask me to come, right? And but I think my answer would be much like the John Henryism.
Yeah.
If they're pretenders, then you got to let them go.
Yeah.
You got to find a place where you feel more whole and more recognized, and you can show up as who you are.
Right.
That's the thing. And let me say this real quick for your audience. They don't know you know this. I had a medical emergency this morning. Not me, but my adult son who lives with us. He's a type 1 diabetic, and he is epileptic. And he had a seizure this morning. I found him right after. And, you know, for any parent, you know, even though he's gone through a number of these, to see blood on him, to try to get him up and prepared to take him to the hospital, but not being able to do that and have to have the emergency come and get him. Here's the riddle in this. I'm here because this is going to make a change and a difference for so many people, right? But I represent hundreds of thousands of Black people. You couldn't tell through this presentation, I hope, what I was dealing with inside. I have a headache, I have a chest ache. I'm sure my blood pressure is up, but I know my colleagues have my son in the best hand, and I've been checking the text as I've been presenting. My wife is keeping me informed. We've been through this before.
Yeah.
So many Black people wear a mask, right?
Mhm.
They don't see what's inside of us, what's going on, because everything that you throw at us, we have to pretend that we're Superwoman, Superman, super they, super them, and just show up, right? And at the end of the day, it's that time when we have to fall back, hopefully, say, oh my gosh. So if you cannot feel alive and healthy in an environment, all you're doing is seeing your premature death occur in real time. I suggest do something that benefits you.
Absolutely. And the death of your idea and your purpose. I think there have been many times in my career, to answer this question as well, where working tirelessly on initiatives that really feeling need to be moved and embedded inside organizations, only to come up with significant resistance and polarization. And I remember at some point before I actually created the leadership competency architecture of the diversity waymaker, I actually was at the point where I said to myself, I looked in the mirror and I said, if it comes a time when the resistance is so bad and you're constantly in a fetal position and you're constantly trying to create change that clearly people are telling you they are not having any part of, you must exit.
Right.
And you have to not be fearful in that exit. Know that what is for you is for you. Believe in your strength and spirituality and what you're doing and the purpose of the work as your gift, and move forward. You have to trust it. We can't get caught up in this fear of, oh, I might lose my job, right? My livelihood. But again, that's a trauma response to everything that we've been dealing with in the past. We have to have confidence and say, no, this is not where I can do my best work. This is not where I can do it. So let me move into an environment where I can do my best work, and then watch yourself flourish, because that's when the beauty actually happens. So the next question, any suggestions for corporate structures that small, medium-sized companies can implement to reduce racial battle fatigue for its employees?
Well, that's a whole workshop.
Again, that's another sermon, but
yeah. And that would take a long time to deal with. But, and I actually offer another presentation, but I should have thought about that for this one. When companies do the right thing, they find major gain in their bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about millions to trillions of dollars.
Yep.
And what they do is to reduce the likelihood of lawsuits, which companies are paying millions of dollars each year because of the racism, discrimination, sexism, and everything else, homophobia that is part of its, institutionalization.
Mm-hmm.
So when you act appropriately with with your staff, with your clientele in the best decision-making process, you tend to have a more holistically healthy environment. People love to show up, and then people start to brag about how good it is there. And now it becomes a magnet for recruitment.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the bottom line to that. There's a saying that I like, an old saying, culture eats strategy. A culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Breakfast,
right?
yeah.
Culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Right.
So what does that mean? That means no matter what strategy we throw at it, it's not going to work, or it's going to be slow to work. We have to change the culture. If your culture is sexist against women, then we have to change that culture. And that might mean that we got to get rid of some people for the culture to be more healthy. If your culture is anti-trans, that means we got to change the culture for not only trans people to be able to show up in their full capacity, but for the environment to be healthy for them and for everyone else. So the culture is the thing that must be changed. We're less about the strategy if you're not focusing on the culture.
And create the culture from the beginning. Those small, medium-sized companies with heart that are not so far down the institutionalization path of bad behavior, of sick cultures, of pain inside organization, or organizational pain, as we OD heads call it. It's really, really important to embed that culture. If you for the large organizations now that are struggling to actually break the ceiling in DE&I, it's really quite stalled. The reason why it's stalled is because there's an institutional way and behavior that started from the beginning that was never corrected.
Exactly.
And when it's never corrected, it's harder. It's so deep in the DNA that it's harder for you to get in there and disrupt it without blowing up the whole system, right? And they're not going to do that. There are a whole lot of reasons why. So it's critically important that small and medium businesses, and as they grow, really develop that culture from the beginning, institutionalize it, make it a part of the DNA, and then build upon that so that you can actually observe and recognize when something that is against that culture is trying to penetrate it. Right. And you can quickly correct it and then continue the positive institutionalization of that culture.
And some of you said earlier, you might be really not recognizing the door and opportunity being open for you to step out on your own, to create your own business. You have the intelligence, you have the experience, you have all those things, but some of us, and it might come from imposter syndrome, are reluctant to step out on faith in who we are and to believe in ourselves enough to say, no, I can do this. I talked to a Black woman yesterday, encouraging her to make a move that is the right move for her to make. Absolutely. She's just scared, right? And the company is a very progressive company, and they have written everything for her to be successful, as opposed to the one that she's in. Right. And sometimes it just takes that conversation that you have your battle buddy who can say, I believe in you. You got to believe in yourself. Right.
Trust yourself and trust your gift. Right. Trust your purpose.
Exactly.
And that is crucially important. One final question before we wrap this up. The question is around what Euro-white colleagues can do to support the effort of dismantling racism.
Yeah, I believe with that, you have to have, you got to read more, you have to study. Many of your allies, white allies, are well-meaning but unprepared. They have to study. They don't realize, particularly in the Black culture, many of us grew up in, especially of my age, grew up in Black churches where the sermons were constantly about the Black experience, and it was connected to, the Bible and how we have to push forward. The dinner table conversations that you have, the conversations you have with your friends, everything, even the comedians, when they joke, Richard Pryor talking about the police and how the police handled him, right? So it's in the comedy of our greatest comedians. So we're always being racially socialized to be prepared for how to deal with a situation. Rarely is it the white individual who's ever heard a sermon, who's ever had these conversations, who's ever read a book. If you were to look around this is my home office, if you were to look around my home office, thousands of books, and it's not just because I'm a professor. my mother raised me in a home with Black encyclopedias and everything else. So that was what I was accustomed to. So for the white ally, start to read and start to prepare yourself and you need your own support group, because some things will break you down when you start to really understand, what's happening in our society that Florida doesn't want to hear about. Right? That they don't want to go through the healing process. So I would say read. And there's thousands of lectures on YouTube now that you can hear some of these speakers, even from back in the day. Take notes, right? Get a small group of your white closest friends and say, we're going to go through this book and we're going to have a discussion. And let's prepare ourselves so we will have the necessary repertoire that we can pull from so we can show up. Remember that ABC series, what was it called? What Would You Do?
Oh, yeah.
Right? And they had all these little scenarios.
Yeah.
And many of the people weren't prepared to show up. Some were active, but for many of us, the majority of us, we don't know what to do. We don't want to intercede. We just want to be out of it. We want it to disappear. We can't afford to be that.
And feel like it's not my problem. And we encourage the identity reconciliation part of that, especially for, your white colleagues to the attendee. We really encourage that, because how else are you going to be able to embrace and understand what's needed or required of you as an ally if you have not yet reconciled with your own identity, your own lineage, your own reasoning why your ideologies are the way they are. And then you can do your best work in support of creating anti-racist environments. Dr. Smith, my heart, thanks you, is just full. And I hope everyone else who's joined today is equally as full from your enlightenment and your encouragement for us to obviously do better in how we address racial battle fatigue in our own lives, in our own experiences. So with that, I will turn it back over to Maylene to bring us home.
Thank you so much, Dr. Smith, Yolanda, for that very insightful and profound conversation. Really, I speak on behalf of the folks that are still with us in saying that I really learned a lot, and we're so appreciative of you sharing your scholarship with us, Dr. Smith. And this has got to be one of the best events that we've put together. And again, thank you for sharing space with us. In the last few minutes that we have, I just wanted to note that we will be providing more information about upcoming events in our thought leadership series through the DEI Center of Excellence coming up. And we would very much like for people to complete our post-event survey. We really learn a lot from your perspectives and your honest feedback about these presentations so that we can continue to improve upon our offerings. I posted the link on chat, and we will be back in touch. Again, thank you all so much, and more to come. For those who have signed up and are here today, we will be sending out an e-newsletter in about a month or so with the link to Dr. Smith's talk. We will have it archived and make sure that you have access to it as well to revisit some of the poignant moments in this presentation. Thank you all so much, and giving you time back. Appreciate your time.